Pack your bags, Mom's moving in with you since you're too selfish to help your own family. My brother Damien's voice echoed through my phone, dripping with venom and entitlement. I stared at my device in disbelief, wondering how refusing a ridiculous $50,000 loan request had suddenly made me responsible for our elderly mother's living arrangements. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Sterling, and I'm a 45-year-old financial advisor living in the peaceful suburb of Willowbrook Heights. For the past 15 years, I've worked tirelessly to build a stable, comfortable life after my divorce. My modest two-bedroom house may not be a mansion, but it's mine, paid off through years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. I've learned the hard way that financial independence isn't just about money, it's about freedom, security, and peace of mind. My relationship with my younger brother Damien has always been complicated. While I was the responsible older sister who put herself through college working 3 part-time jobs, Damien was the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. He was charismatic, charming, and had a talent for talking his way out of any situation. Unfortunately, those same traits that made him popular also made him incredibly irresponsible with money. Throughout our adult lives, Damien had established a pattern that I knew all too well. Every few months, he would call with some new investment opportunity or temporary financial setback that required immediate cash infusion. There was the failed restaurant venture that cost him $30,000, the pyramid scheme that wiped out his savings, and countless other get-rich-quick schemes that always ended the same way, with Damien asking family members to bail him out. His wife, Patricia, enabled this behavior completely. She came from a wealthy family and had never experienced real financial hardship. To her, money was just something that appeared when you needed it, and she couldn't understand why anyone would hesitate to hand over large sums to family members. Together, they lived in a sprawling house in Riverside Estates, driving luxury cars and taking expensive vacations, all while constantly teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The latest request had come 2 weeks ago. Damien had called, unusually subdued, explaining that he had invested their entire savings in cryptocurrency based on a hot tip from a friend. The investment had crashed spectacularly, leaving them not only broke but actually in debt to the tune of $75,000. He needed $50,000 immediately to prevent their house from going into foreclosure. "It's just a loan, Becca," he had pleaded, using the childhood nickname he knew I hated. "I'll pay you back with interest once I get back on my feet. You know I'm good for it." But I did know. I knew that Damien had never paid back a single loan in his entire adult life. I knew that his definition of temporary was whatever length of time it took for people to stop asking about repayment. Most importantly, I knew that enabling his reckless behavior wasn't helping him, it was making things worse. So I said no. It wasn't an easy decision. I had the money sitting in my retirement account, carefully saved over years of living below my means. I could technically afford to give it to him without becoming destitute myself. But principle mattered more than convenience, and I refused to reward irresponsibility with rescue. Damien's reaction had been swift and brutal. First came the guilt trips. "I can't believe my own sister would let me lose my house." Then the manipulation. "What would Dad think if he knew you abandoned family?" Finally, the threats. "Don't come crying to me when you need help someday." I had weathered all of these emotional storms before. What I hadn't expected was his latest escalation, involving our 78-year-old mother, Dorothy. Mom had been living independently in her small apartment in Maplewood Gardens, a senior living community about 30 minutes from both Damien and me. She was still sharp mentally and reasonably healthy physically, though she did need some assistance with heavy housework and transportation to medical appointments. Both Damien and I helped out regularly, and she seemed content with her living situation. But apparently, Damien had been working on her behind the scenes, painting me as the villain who was destroying our family's unity. According to his version of events, my selfishness in refusing the loan had created a financial crisis that now required drastic measures. Since I clearly couldn't be trusted to help family in need, the logical solution was for Mom to move in with me, where I could take full responsibility for her care. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She needs more help than she's been letting on, Damien had continued during that awful phone call. Patricia and I would love to take her in, but our guest room is being renovated, and with our current financial situation. He let the implication hang in the air. The financial situation I had supposedly created by refusing to enable his gambling addiction. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. By framing Mom's move as a consequence of my decision rather than his irresponsibility, Damien was attempting to saddle me with both the guilt and the burden. If I agreed to take her in, I would be rewarding his manipulation and accepting responsibility for his mistakes. If I refused, I would look like a heartless daughter abandoning her elderly mother. But there was something else in his voice during that call, a smugness that suggested he believed he had finally found the perfect pressure point. He thought he had me cornered, that maternal guilt would succeed where sibling obligation had failed. What Damien didn't realize was that his latest scheme would backfire in ways he never could have imagined. Because while he was busy congratulating himself on his clever manipulation, he was about to discover that some lines should never be crossed, and some sisters are done being pushed around. Let me tell you how we got to this point, because understanding my family's dynamics is crucial to grasping just how calculated Damien's latest move really was. I'm Rebecca Sterling, and I've spent most of my adult life being the family's unofficial financial safety net. Growing up in the small town of Cedar Falls, our father worked as a mechanic while our mother managed the household on a tight budget. Money was always scarce, but our parents instilled in me the importance of hard work and fiscal responsibility. Damien, being 6 years younger, seemed to absorb none of these lessons. Our father, Robert Sterling, passed away 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He left behind a modest life insurance policy and a small pension that helped Mom maintain her independence. More importantly, he left behind a legacy of strong work ethic and financial prudence that I had embraced wholeheartedly, but that Damien had somehow completely missed. The warning signs of Damien's financial irresponsibility started early. In high school, he constantly borrowed money from me for everything from lunch to gas money, promising to pay me back from his part-time job at the local grocery store. Those repayments never materialized. In college, funded entirely by our parents' sacrifices and student loans, he majored in business but spent more time partying than studying. When he graduated with barely passing grades, he blamed his professors for being too theoretical and claimed he would prove his worth in the real world. That's when the cycle of failed ventures began. His first business was a mobile car detailing service. He convinced our parents to co-sign a loan for $15,000 to buy equipment and a van. The business lasted 6 months before folding due to what Damien called market conditions, though I suspected it had more to do with his habit of showing up to appointments hungover or not at all. Our parents ended up making the loan payments for 2 years. Next came a brief stint selling insurance, which lasted exactly 3 months. Then it was real estate, network marketing, day trading, and a disastrous attempt at running a food truck that lost money every single day it operated. Each failure was accompanied by elaborate explanations about external factors beyond his control, and each one left him a little deeper in debt. During all of this, I was building my career as a financial advisor with Henderson and Associates in Willowbrook Heights. I had started as an entry-level assistant and worked my way up through sheer determination and competence. My clients trusted me because I practiced what I preached, living modestly, saving consistently, and making measured investment decisions. While Damien was chasing get-rich-quick schemes, I was slowly and steadily building actual wealth. The contrast between our approaches to money became even starker after he married Patricia Blackwell. Patricia came from old money in Riverside Estates, the kind of family where financial problems were solved by writing checks rather than making difficult choices. Her father owned several successful businesses, and she had grown up assuming that money was essentially unlimited as long as you knew the right people. Together, Damien and Patricia created a perfect storm of financial dysfunction. She provided the connections and initial capital for his ventures, while he provided the unrealistic optimism and poor judgment that ensured those ventures would fail. They lived in a beautiful colonial house that Patricia's father had helped them buy, drove BMWs that were leased through one of her family's companies, and maintained a lifestyle that looked prosperous from the outside but was actually built on a foundation of debt and family subsidies. What made their situation particularly galling was how they treated our mother during this time. When Dad passed away and Mom was struggling with grief and the practical challenges of widowhood, I was the one who helped her sort through financial documents, find a good estate lawyer, and eventually move into her senior living apartment. I was the one who drove her to doctor appointments, helped her grocery shop, and called her every few days to check in. Damien and Patricia, meanwhile, made grand gestures when it suited them. They would swoop in for holiday dinners and family gatherings, bringing expensive gifts and regaling everyone with stories of their latest business ventures. They treated Mom like a beloved but slightly simple relative, talking over her when she tried to contribute to conversations and dismissing her concerns about their lifestyle as old-fashioned thinking. But I noticed things they didn't think I saw. Like how Damien would casually mention to Mom that money was a little tight, right before her birthday or Christmas, prompting her to write checks that she could barely afford. Or how Patricia would admire Mom's jewelry during visits, leading to gifts of family heirlooms that somehow always coincided with their financial emergencies. The pattern became clear. Damien and Patricia took from Mom when they needed something, but they were notably absent when she needed practical help or emotional support. They were takers, pure and simple, but they were skilled at making their taking look like loving family closeness. That's why the phone call from 3 weeks ago should have been a bigger red flag than it was. Mom had called me, sounding unusually flustered, to say that Damien had been visiting more frequently and asking a lot of questions about her finances. He had offered to help her organize her affairs, and had been encouraging her to consolidate her accounts for better management. At the time, I had assumed he was actually trying to be helpful for once. Mom was getting older, and it wasn't unreasonable for family to start having conversations about financial planning and future care needs. I even felt a little guilty for being suspicious of his motives. I should have trusted my instincts. Because what I didn't realize was that Damien had been laying groundwork for something much more ambitious than another simple loan request. He had been systematically positioning himself as Mom's financial advisor and primary caregiver, all while poisoning her perception of my selfishness and unwillingness to help family. The cryptocurrency disaster hadn't been a sudden crisis, it had been the catalyst for a plan that had been months in the making. And now, as I sat in my quiet house in Willowbrook Heights, staring at my phone after his latest ultimatum, I was beginning to understand just how deep his manipulation really went. I decided to call Mom directly to get her side of the story. Something about Damien's sudden concern for her living situation didn't sit right with me, especially given the timing right after his loan rejection. When I dialed her number at Maplewood Gardens, she answered on the second ring with her usual cheerful voice. "Rebecca, dear. What a lovely surprise. I was just having my afternoon tea and watching my stories." "Hi Mom, how are you feeling? Damien mentioned you might need some additional help around the apartment." I kept my tone casual, not wanting to alarm her or reveal that I suspected manipulation. There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Oh, well, you know how it is at my age. Some days are better than others. Damien has been so thoughtful, coming by to check on me more often. He's such a good son." That phrase, "such a good son," was one I'd been hearing more frequently lately, usually in contrast to some perceived shortcoming on my part. Has he been helping with specific things? Groceries, appointments, that sort of thing? He's been wonderful about offering to help with my finances. You know how confusing all those statements can be, and he has such a head for business. He even offered to help me find a better bank with higher interest rates. My blood ran cold. Damien helping with finances was like asking an arsonist to install your smoke detectors. "Mom, your current bank has been serving you well for 20 years. What kind of changes is he suggesting?" "Oh, nothing major, dear. He just thinks I could be earning more on my savings. And he mentioned that keeping all my accounts in one place might make things simpler for when I need more help managing things." There it was, the setup. Damien wasn't just planning to manipulate me into taking Mom in, he was positioning himself to gain access to her finances. The consolidation of accounts would make it easier for him to eventually gain power of attorney or simply help her make withdrawals during his financial emergencies. "Mom, has anyone discussed changing your power of attorney arrangements recently?" Another pause. "Well, Damien did mention that it might be wise to update some of my paperwork." He said that since you're so busy with work in your own life, it might be better to have someone who's more available to help with important decisions. The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated precision. Damien had been visiting Mom regularly, not out of genuine concern, but to systematically undermine my relationship with her while positioning himself as the more caring, available child. He was rewriting history to make my career success look like neglect and his unemployment look like availability. Has he asked you to sign any documents yet? Not yet, but he's bringing some papers next week for me to review. He's been so patient, explaining everything in terms I can understand. You know how you sometimes talk over my head with all that financial jargon, dear. I felt a stab of guilt. It was true that I sometimes got caught up in technical explanations when discussing investments or insurance with Mom. But that wasn't neglect, it was respect for her intelligence. Damien, on the other hand, was using deliberately simplified language to make her feel dependent and confused. Mom, I want you to promise me something. Don't sign anything until we can review it together, okay? Even if it seems harmless. Financial documents can be tricky, and I'd hate for you to accidentally agree to something that might not be in your best interest. Oh, Rebecca, you worry too much. Damien explained that you might react this way. He said you sometimes get anxious about money matters and might try to complicate things unnecessarily. There it was, the preemptive strike. Damien had already prepared her for my concerns by framing them as my personal neuroses rather than legitimate warnings. He was inoculating her against my advice by suggesting that my financial expertise was actually a character flaw. After ending the call with Mom, I sat in my kitchen staring out at my carefully maintained garden, trying to process the full scope of what Damien was attempting. This wasn't just about getting a loan anymore. He was orchestrating a comprehensive takeover of Mom's life and finances, with me cast as either the villain who abandoned family or the sucker who ended up responsible for her care while he controlled her money. The next morning, I called my office and cleared my schedule for the afternoon. I needed to see Mom in person and assess the situation without Damien's influence. The drive to Maplewood Gardens gave me time to think through my approach. I couldn't come across as paranoid or controlling, but I needed to understand exactly what Damien had been telling her. Maplewood Gardens was a well-maintained senior community with assisted living options ranging from independent apartments to full nursing care. Mom had chosen a one-bedroom unit in the independent living section, and she had been happy there for the past 5 years. The staff knew her well, she had friends in the community, and she had established routines that gave her days structure and purpose. When I arrived at her apartment, I was surprised to see several moving boxes stacked in the corner of her living room. They weren't packed, but their presence was ominous. "Oh, those," Mom said when she noticed my stare. "Damien brought them over yesterday. He said it would be good to start thinking about what I'd want to take if I ever needed to move somewhere with more support. Have you been having trouble managing here? Is there something specific that's become difficult?" Mom settled into her favorite armchair, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. "It's not that anything's wrong exactly, but Damien pointed out some things I hadn't really thought about. Like what would happen if I fell and couldn't reach the phone, or if I forgot to take my medications, or if someone took advantage of me financially. Each of these concerns was valid in theory, but Mom was still sharp, still mobile, and still managing her daily life independently. What Damien was doing was planting seeds of self-doubt and anxiety about hypothetical future problems to make her current living situation seem precarious. Has anything like that actually happened? Have you fallen or forgotten medications? Well, no, but Damien says it's better to be proactive. He's found some very nice assisted living facilities that would take better care of me. Or..." She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Or what, Mom?" "Or he thought it might be nice for me to spend some time with family. He mentioned that your house has that extra bedroom, and you're so good with organizing and managing things. He said it might actually help you too, having someone to come home to instead of being all alone in that big house." The manipulation was masterful. Damien had reframed his scheme as a favor to me. Lonely spinster daughter gets companionship while dutiful son ensures Mom gets proper care. Meanwhile, he would position himself as the loving son who had facilitated this beautiful arrangement, all while gaining access to Mom's financial resources and avoiding any actual caregiving responsibilities himself. I spent the next 2 hours with Mom, carefully probing to understand the full extent of Damien's influence campaign. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had feared. He had been systematically undermining her confidence in her current living situation, her financial security, and her relationship with me. He had painted a picture of a future filled with dangers and uncertainties that could only be solved by consolidating control under his guidance. But I also discovered something that Damien didn't know I knew. Mom had been keeping a journal. And in that journal, she had been recording her conversations with both of us, trying to make sense of the conflicting messages she was receiving. What she had written there would prove to be Damien's undoing, though he wouldn't discover that until much later. As I drove home that evening, I realized that Damien had made a critical miscalculation. He had assumed that I would either cave to his demands or that Mom would side with him automatically. What he hadn't considered was that I might fight back strategically, using the same long-term planning skills that had made me successful in my career. Damien wanted to play games with family loyalty and financial manipulation. Fine. But he was about to discover that some games have consequences he never saw coming. The next few weeks revealed just how deep Damien's manipulation campaign had been running. What I initially thought was a recent reaction to his financial crisis turned out to be a months-long systematic effort to position himself as Mom's primary advocate and caregiver. It started with small things I had dismissed as coincidences. 3 months ago, Mom had mentioned that she was thinking about getting a medical alert system after hearing about a neighbor who had fallen. I had offered to research options and help her choose one, but she said Damien had already looked into it and found the perfect solution. When I asked to see what he had recommended, she couldn't find the paperwork and seemed confused about the details. 2 months ago, she had called me worried about a letter from her insurance company about changes to her Medicare supplement plan. By the time I offered to come over and help her understand it, she said Damien had already stopped by and taken care of everything. When I pressed for details about what changes had been made, she was vague and said she trusted his judgment completely. Looking back now, I could see the pattern clearly. Damien had been inserting himself into every aspect of Mom's life that involved paperwork, financial decisions, or planning for the future. He was creating a paper trail that would show him as the involved, caring son while simultaneously making me appear absent and uninvolved. But it was a conversation with Mrs. Henderson, Mom's next-door neighbor at Maplewood Gardens, that really opened my eyes to the scope of his campaign. I had stopped by to visit Mom on a Saturday afternoon, only to find her apartment empty. Mrs. Henderson, who was watering plants in the hallway, mentioned that she had seen Mom leave with that handsome son of yours earlier that morning. He's been such a devoted visitor lately, Mrs. Henderson continued. Almost every week now. It's so nice to see a young man who cares so much about his mother. Not like some families where the children never visit once they put their parents in a place like this. The implication stung, even though I knew Mrs. Henderson meant no harm. I visit regularly too, I said, perhaps more defensively than I intended. Oh, of course you do, dear. But you know how it is, daughters are expected to handle the practical things, but sons, well, when sons make an effort, it really means something special. And your brother always has time to sit and really talk with your mother, not just rush in and out handling business. This narrative, that I was the dutiful but businesslike daughter while Damien was the emotionally connected son, was clearly not Mrs. Henderson's own observation. Someone had been crafting this story, and I suspected I knew who. Has my brother mentioned anything specific about Mom's health or living situation during these visits? Mrs. Henderson glanced around conspiratorially and lowered her voice. Well, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I did overhear him talking to your mother about how hard it must be for her, living alone at her age. He was asking if she ever felt scared at night, or worried about what would happen if she needed help and no one was around. Such thoughtful questions from a caring son. Except they weren't thoughtful questions, they were fear-inducing suggestions designed to make Mom doubt her own safety and independence. Damien was systematically planting anxieties that would make his eventual solution seem like a natural and necessary response. When Mom returned that afternoon, she was carrying shopping bags from an expensive department store in Riverside Estates, the kind of place where Patricia shopped, but certainly not somewhere Mom would normally spend her money. Damien took me shopping for some new clothes, she explained, looking pleased but slightly overwhelmed. He said I deserved to treat myself, and Patricia helped me pick out some lovely outfits. They said I've been looking a bit tired lately, and that new clothes might help me feel more confident. I examined the clothes she showed me, elegant but expensive pieces that were beautiful but completely impractical for her lifestyle at Maplewood Gardens. The total value of what she had purchased was easily over $800, money that represented a significant portion of her monthly discretionary income. These are lovely, Mom, but when will you wear them? They seem quite formal for daily life here. Her face fell slightly. Damien said the same thing. He mentioned that I might need nicer clothes if my living situation changed. He said it's important to look your best when you're meeting new people or being evaluated for different care options. There it was, another piece of the puzzle. The expensive clothes weren't about making Mom feel good, they were about preparing her for the transition Damien was orchestrating. He was positioning himself as the generous son who ensured she would be properly dressed for interviews at assisted living facilities or for moving in with family members. But the most disturbing revelation came when Mom mentioned, almost casually, that Damien had offered to help her update her will. He said it's important to make sure everything is current and reflects my wishes. He even offered to pay for a lawyer to make sure everything is done properly. Isn't that thoughtful? My heart sank. Mom, your will was updated just 3 years ago when you moved here. What specific changes does Damien think need to be made? She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with the sleeve of one of her new outfits. Well, he pointed out that circumstances change, and that sometimes people who seem responsible might not actually be the best choice for important roles. He said I should think carefully about who really has my best interests at heart. The implication was clear. Damien was suggesting that I should be removed as executor of Mom's estate and possibly as a beneficiary as well. He was using my refusal to give him the loan as evidence that I was selfish and unreliable, unworthy of the trust Mom had placed in me. Did he suggest specific changes he thought would be appropriate? He said we should discuss it with a lawyer he knows who specializes in elder law. Someone who could help me understand all my options and make sure my wishes are properly documented. He said it's important to work with someone who understands the complexities of family dynamics and financial planning. In other words, a lawyer who would be working for Damien's interests rather than Mom's, someone who would draft documents that gave him maximum control over her affairs while making it appear that these were her independent decisions. That evening, I called my friend Jennifer Walsh, an attorney who specialized in elder law and estate planning. Jennifer and I had worked together on several client cases where families needed to coordinate financial planning with legal documentation. Rebecca, what you're describing sounds like textbook financial elder abuse, Jennifer said after I explained the situation. The isolation from other advisors, the systematic undermining of confidence, the rushed changes to legal documents, these are all red flags we watch for. But he's her son. Doesn't that make a difference legally? Actually, it makes it worse. Family members are statistically the most likely perpetrators of elder financial abuse. The emotional manipulation you're describing is often more effective than outright fraud because the victim wants to believe their family member has their best interests at heart. Jennifer suggested that I document everything I had observed and prepare for the possibility that I might need to seek legal intervention if Damien's manipulation escalated. She also recommended that I encourage Mom to get an independent assessment of her mental capacity and decision-making ability, just to establish a baseline in case questions arose later about her competency during this period. As I hung up the phone, I realized that what I had initially seen as Damien's desperate reaction to financial crisis was actually something much more calculated and sinister. He wasn't just trying to manipulate me into giving him money or taking responsibility for Mom's care. He was systematically positioning himself to gain control over her entire life and estate. But Damien had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate scheme. He had underestimated both Mom's intelligence and my determination to protect her. While he was busy playing psychological games and crafting narratives, I was gathering evidence and building a case that would eventually expose his true motivations to everyone involved. The question now was whether I could act quickly enough to prevent him from doing irreversible damage to Mom's independence and financial security. Because if I had learned anything from my years as a financial advisor, it was that once someone gains control over an elderly person's affairs, it can be nearly impossible to undo the damage without lengthy legal battles that often traumatize the very people they're meant to protect. Damien thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when I received a call at work that made my blood run cold. It was the director of Maplewood Gardens, Mrs. Catherine Bloom, and her voice carried a note of professional concern that immediately put me on high alert. "Miss Sterling, I'm calling about your mother's account. We've received notice that she'll be terminating her lease at the end of next month. I wanted to confirm the details with you since you're listed as her emergency contact." I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, what? My mother hasn't mentioned anything about moving. Are you sure there hasn't been some mistake? According to our records, your brother Damien Sterling came in yesterday with your mother to begin the move-out process. He presented documentation showing that he has been granted power of attorney for health and financial decisions. They've already started the paperwork for lease termination and deposit refund." The room seemed to spin around me. Power of attorney. Damien had actually done it. He had convinced Mom to sign over legal control of her life to him. And he had done it without telling me, moving quickly to present the facility with a fait accompli before I could intervene. "Mrs. Bloom, I need to see that documentation immediately. I'll be there within the hour." "Of course." I should mention that your mother seemed, well, she appeared somewhat confused about the timeline. She kept asking if there was time to discuss it with you first, but your brother assured her that you had already been consulted and approved of the arrangement. Another lie. Another manipulation. Damien was now using forged consent from me to pressure Mom into decisions she clearly wasn't comfortable making. I canceled my afternoon appointments and drove directly to Maplewood Gardens, my mind racing through the legal implications of what Damien had done. If he had legitimately obtained power of attorney, he would have broad authority to make decisions about Mom's living situation, medical care, and finances. But the speed and secrecy of his actions suggested that something wasn't right about the process. Mrs. Bloom met me in her office with a thick file spread across her desk. The power of attorney documents looked official, complete with notary seals and legal language, but something about them felt rushed. The date was only 3 days old, and they had been executed at a law office I had never heard of, Hartwell and Associates, located in the same building as one of Patricia's family businesses. Did my mother seem competent when she signed the lease termination papers? Did she understand what she was agreeing to? Mrs. Bloom chose her words carefully. "Your mother has always been sharp and independent-minded during her time here. Yesterday, however, she seemed overwhelmed. She kept deferring to your brother on all the details and asking if she could think about it overnight. He was quite insistent that the paperwork needed to be completed immediately due to timing constraints with her new living arrangement." "What new living arrangement? Where is she supposedly moving?" "According to your brother, she'll be moving in with family temporarily while you all determine the best long-term care options. He mentioned that you had graciously offered to take her in until more permanent arrangements could be made." The audacity of it took my breath away. Damien had not only forced Mom into signing over power of attorney, but he was now using my name to legitimize his scheme. In his version of events, I was the dutiful daughter who had agreed to take on caregiving responsibilities, making him look like the thoughtful son who had arranged everything for everyone's benefit. "Mrs. Bloom, I want to be very clear. I did not agree to any of this. I was not consulted about these arrangements, and I have serious concerns about the circumstances under which these documents were signed." Her expression grew more troubled. "Miss Sterling, if you're suggesting that there might be issues with the validity of these documents or your mother's capacity when she signed them, I'm suggesting that I need to speak with my mother immediately, and I want a record made of this conversation. Something is very wrong here." Mrs. Bloom agreed to note our discussion in Mom's file and to delay any further processing of the lease termination until the situation could be clarified. She also mentioned that Mom was currently in the community's craft room, working on a quilting project with some of her friends. I found Mom hunched over a complicated quilt pattern, her usually steady hands shaking slightly as she tried to thread a needle. When she looked up and saw me, her face showed relief mixed with anxiety. "Rebecca, dear, I'm so glad you're here. I'd been worried that I did something wrong yesterday, but Damien assured me that everything was fine and that you understood. I sat down beside her, noting that several of her friends had discreetly moved to other tables to give us privacy. Mom, can you tell me exactly what happened yesterday? What did Damien ask you to sign? Her explanation was heartbreaking in its confusion. Damien had arrived at her apartment with a lawyer in tow, explaining that there had been developments in my situation that required immediate action. According to his story, I was facing some unspecified financial difficulties and needed help managing Mom's care arrangements. He said you were too proud to ask for help directly, but that you had confided in him about feeling overwhelmed. The lawyer explained that if I signed some papers giving Damien temporary authority to help with my affairs, it would take the pressure off you while still keeping everything in the family. The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel. Damien had exploited Mom's love for me and her desire not to be a burden, convincing her that signing over her autonomy was actually an act of kindness toward me. Mom, did the lawyer explain exactly what powers you were giving Damien? Did anyone go through the documents with you line by line? She looked embarrassed. It was all very technical, dear. The lawyer spoke very quickly and used a lot of legal terms I didn't understand. Damien said he would explain everything to me later in simpler language, but that we needed to sign the papers right away because there were deadlines involved. Classic high-pressure tactics. No time for questions, no opportunity for independent advice, and complex legal language designed to confuse rather than inform. Did anyone suggest that you might want to call me or have your own lawyer review the documents? I did ask if I could call you, but Damien said you were in important meetings all day and that you had specifically asked him to handle everything so you wouldn't be distracted. He said you trusted his judgment and just wanted to know that I was being taken care of. Another lie, another manipulation. Damien had systematically cut off every avenue Mom might have used to verify his claims or seek independent advice. But then Mom said something that gave me hope. Rebecca, I kept one copy of the papers, even though the lawyer said I didn't need to. Something felt rushed, and I wanted to have them in case I had questions later. They're in my apartment if you'd like to see them. Smart woman. Even under pressure and confusion, Mom's instincts had told her to maintain some control over the situation. When we reached her apartment, Mom retrieved a manila envelope from her kitchen drawer. Inside were copies of the power of attorney documents, but also something else, a business card for the lawyer who had witnessed the signing, and a handwritten note in Mom's shaky writing. The note read, "Questions to ask Rebecca. Was this really her idea? Does she really need help with my care? Why couldn't she tell me herself? Something doesn't feel right." Even while being manipulated and pressured, Mom had maintained enough clarity to document her doubts. These notes, combined with the rushed timeline and questionable circumstances of the signing, would be crucial evidence if we needed to challenge the validity of the documents. As I studied the power of attorney paperwork more carefully, I noticed several troubling details. The language was unusually broad, giving Damien authority not just over medical and housing decisions, but over all financial transactions, including the ability to change beneficiaries on accounts and policies. This wasn't a limited power of attorney designed to help with specific decisions. It was a comprehensive takeover of Mom's legal and financial autonomy. More disturbing still, the documents included a clause stating that Mom acknowledged she was beginning to experience some cognitive decline that affects her ability to manage complex decisions independently. This language would make it much harder to challenge the validity of the documents later, since it suggested that Mom herself had admitted to diminished capacity. But I knew Mom, and despite her age and occasional moments of confusion about technical matters, she was still sharp, independent, and fully capable of making her own decisions when given accurate information and time to consider her options. Damien had crossed a line from manipulation into what was potentially criminal fraud. But proving that would require careful documentation and strategic action. One wrong move could result in Mom being caught in a legal battle that would be traumatic and expensive, exactly the outcome I was trying to prevent. As I sat in Mom's apartment, reading through the documents that had signed away her independence, I realized that the stakes had escalated far beyond Damien's original loan request. This was now about protecting Mom from a son who was willing to exploit her love and trust for his own financial gain. But Damien had made a critical error in his rush to seize control. In his arrogance and desperation, He had moved too fast and left too many witnesses to his deception. What he didn't know was that I was already 3 steps ahead, and his house of lies was about to come crashing down in ways he never anticipated. The confrontation I had been dreading finally came the next morning, but not in the way I had expected. Instead of me initiating contact with Damien, he showed up at my office unannounced, strutting through the reception area of Henderson and Associates like he owned the place. My assistant, Linda, buzzed me with barely concealed irritation in her voice. "Rebecca, your brother is here. He says it's urgent family business and he needs to speak with you immediately." I could see Damien through the glass walls of my office, pacing in the reception area and checking his expensive watch with theatrical impatience. He was dressed in one of his best suits, the kind he wore when he was trying to impress potential investors or lenders, and his body language radiated the kind of aggressive confidence that usually preceded his most audacious schemes. "Send him in," I told Linda, steeling myself for what was sure to be an unpleasant encounter. Damien swept into my office without knocking, closing the door behind him and settling into one of my client chairs as if he were the one granting me an audience. His smile was the same one he had worn as a child when he thought he had outsmarted everyone around him. "Well, Rebecca, I have to say I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you to put up such a fight over this whole mom situation. But it's time to stop being stubborn and accept reality." "And what reality is that, Damien?" He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on my desk with a flourish. "The reality is that I now have full legal authority to make decisions about Mom's care and living arrangements. As you can see from these documents, she has acknowledged that she needs help managing her affairs, and she's designated me as her power of attorney." I glanced at the papers. They were copies of the same documents I had seen at Maplewood Gardens, but Damien was presenting them as if they were some kind of trump card in a game I didn't know we were playing. "I'm aware of the documents, Damien. What I'm not clear on is why you felt the need to rush Mom into signing them without giving her time to consider her options or consult with anyone else." His smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Mom is getting older, Rebecca. She's been struggling more than she wants to admit, and someone needed to step up and take charge of the situation. Since you've made it clear that you're not willing to help the family financially, I had to find other solutions." "Help the family financially? You mean give you $50,000 to cover your gambling debts? That money would have solved everything. We could have kept Mom in her apartment, maintained stability for everyone, and avoided all this drama. But you chose to be selfish, so now we're dealing with the consequences." The audacity of his logic was breathtaking. In Damien's version of reality, his financial irresponsibility was somehow my fault, and Mom's forced displacement was a consequence of my unwillingness to enable his addiction. "Damien, Mom doesn't need to leave Maplewood Gardens. She's happy there, she's safe there, and she's perfectly capable of living independently. The only reason she's being forced to move is because you've manipulated her into believing she has no other choice." He leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from false friendliness to cold calculation. "That's your opinion. But legally, it doesn't matter what you think anymore. I have power of attorney, which means I make the decisions about Mom's care. And I've decided that she needs to be in a more supportive environment where family can keep a closer eye on her." "You mean where you can keep a closer eye on her finances?" "I resent that implication, Rebecca. Everything I'm doing is in Mom's best interest. Unlike some people, I actually care about her well-being more than my own convenience. If you cared about her well-being, you wouldn't have pressured her into signing legal documents she didn't understand, with a lawyer she had never met, on a timeline that prevented her from seeking independent advice." Damien's mask of civility finally slipped completely. "You know what your problem is, Rebecca? You think you're smarter than everyone else. You think your college degree and your fancy financial advisor credentials make you the expert on everything. But intelligence isn't the same as wisdom, and wisdom means understanding that family takes care of family. Family doesn't manipulate elderly relatives into signing over their autonomy. Family doesn't abandon their relatives when they need help either. But here we are." He stood up and straightened his tie, preparing for what was clearly intended to be his dramatic exit. "Here's how this is going to work. Mom is moving out of Maplewood Gardens at the end of the month. She's going to stay with you temporarily while I arrange more appropriate long-term care. You're going to provide a loving, supportive environment for her during this transition, because that's what good daughters do. And if I refuse? His smile returned, colder than before. Then you'll be the daughter who abandoned her elderly mother in her time of need. I'll make sure everyone knows, her friends at Maplewood, her church community, our extended family, that when Mom needed help, her successful financial advisor daughter was too busy and too selfish to step up. It was a masterful piece of emotional blackmail. Damien had engineered a situation where any choice I made would cast me as the villain. If I accepted responsibility for Mom's care, would be rewarding his manipulation and enabling his control over her finances. If I refused, would appear heartless and uncaring, validating his narrative about my selfishness. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've had to. Someone in this family needs to think strategically about the future. Mom isn't going to live forever, Rebecca, and when she's gone, there are going to be decisions to make about her estate, her belongings, her legacy. Decisions that should be made by someone who actually understands family loyalty. There it was, the real agenda. This wasn't about Mom's care or well-being at all. It was about positioning himself to control her estate when she died. The power of attorney was just the first step in a larger plan to ensure that he would inherit the bulk of her assets, probably justified by his supposed role as her primary caregiver. What makes you think I'll go along with any of this? Because you don't have a choice. I have legal authority now, Rebecca. I can place Mom in any facility I choose, or with any family member I think is appropriate. If you want to have any influence over her care, you'll need to work with me. And what do you want in exchange for this influence? Just what I've always wanted, for this family to support each other instead of tearing each other down. You help with Mom's care during this transition, I handle the complex legal and financial decisions she's not equipped to make anymore, and we all move forward as a united family. United under your control. United under proper leadership. Someone has to make the hard decisions, Rebecca. Someone has to think about the big picture instead of getting caught up in petty resentments and power struggles. After Damien left my office, trailing the scent of expensive cologne and self-satisfaction, I sat alone trying to process the full scope of his scheme. He hadn't just gained power of attorney over Mom's affairs, he had engineered a comprehensive trap designed to force my compliance with his broader agenda. But as I reviewed our conversation, I realized that Damien had made several critical mistakes in his moment of triumph. His overconfidence had led him to reveal information I could use against him, and his need to gloat had provided me with evidence of his true motivations that would be valuable in any legal challenge to his actions. Most importantly, he had underestimated both Mom's intelligence and my determination to protect her. While he was busy congratulating himself on his clever manipulation, I was already implementing a plan that would expose his scheme and restore Mom's autonomy. Damien thought he held all the cards, but he was about to discover that the game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and the next move was mine. I picked up my phone and dialed Jennifer Walsh's number. It was time to call in professional help and show Damien what real strategic thinking looked like. Jennifer, it's Rebecca Sterling. We need to talk about elder abuse, fraudulent power of attorney documents, and criminal prosecution. How soon can you meet? Jennifer Walsh met me at her law office that same evening, her expression grim as she reviewed the copies of the power of attorney documents and my detailed notes about Damien's behavior over the past several months. Her office, located in downtown Willowbrook Heights, was decorated with warm wood paneling and family photos that spoke to her reputation as an attorney who genuinely cared about protecting vulnerable clients. Rebecca, what we're looking at here is a textbook case of elder financial abuse with some potentially criminal elements, she said, setting down the documents and fixing me with her serious brown eyes. The rushed timeline, the use of an unfamiliar attorney, the broad language of the power of attorney, and most importantly, the deception about your consent, all of these factors suggest that your mother was coerced into signing documents she didn't fully understand. Can we challenge the validity of the documents? Absolutely, but we need to move quickly. The longer your brother operates under the authority of these documents, the more damage he can do to your mother's finances and living situation. We also need to be strategic about how we approach this, because a direct legal challenge could take months to resolve, and your mother could suffer significant trauma in the meantime. Jennifer explained that there were several avenues we could pursue simultaneously. First, we could file for an emergency hearing to suspend the power of attorney pending a full investigation into the circumstances of its execution. Second, we could contact Adult Protective Services to report suspected elder abuse. Third, we could gather evidence to support potential criminal charges for fraud and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. But here's what I want to try first, Jennifer said, leaning forward with a strategic gleam in her eye. Before we go nuclear with legal action, let's give your brother enough rope to hang himself. Based on what you've told me about his pattern of behavior and his financial desperation, I suspect he's going to make moves that will clearly demonstrate his true motivations. She outlined a plan that was both brilliant and risky. Instead of immediately challenging the power of attorney, we would document Damien's actions while quietly building our case. Jennifer would arrange for a forensic accountant to review Mom's financial records and identify any suspicious transactions. We would also set up surveillance of Mom's interactions with Damien to ensure her safety while gathering evidence of his manipulation. The key is to let him think he's winning while we gather irrefutable proof of his misconduct. When we're ready to move, we want to have such a strong case that he has no choice but to surrender control and face the consequences of his actions. The next morning, I called Mom and suggested we meet for lunch at her favorite restaurant, a cozy cafe called the Garden Terrace near Maplewood Gardens. I needed to assess her current state of mind and begin the delicate process of helping her understand what had really happened with the power of attorney documents. When I arrived at the restaurant, I was shocked by Mom's appearance. In just the few days since Damien had gained power of attorney, she seemed to have aged years. Her usually neat hair was unkempt, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had dark circles under her eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping well. "Mom, you look tired. Are you feeling all right?" She stirred her soup absently, not meeting my eyes. "I've been having trouble sleeping, dear. There's so much to think about with the move and all the changes. Damien has been calling every day with new arrangements and decisions that need to be made. It's all happening so fast." "What kind of arrangements?" "Well, he's found a lovely assisted living facility called Golden Years Manor that he thinks would be perfect for me. He's already put down a deposit and scheduled me for an assessment next week. He said it's important to secure a spot quickly because they have a waiting list." My heart sank. Golden Years Manor was a facility I knew by reputation, expensive, medically focused, and designed for people who needed significant daily assistance. It was completely inappropriate for Mom's current level of independence, and the cost would quickly drain her savings. "Mom, did you ask to see this facility yourself? Did you have any input into the choice?" Damien said he and Patricia had visited several places and done all the research. He said my opinion was important, but that I might get overwhelmed by all the details and technical considerations. He promised that I would love Golden Years once I settled in. More manipulation. Damien was steamrolling over Mom's autonomy by suggesting that her input was valued while simultaneously dismissing her capacity to make informed decisions. "Has he discussed the cost with you? Do you understand how much this facility charges?" Mom looked uncomfortable. "He said not to worry about money, that he would handle all the financial arrangements. He mentioned something about using some of my savings and possibly selling some investments to cover the costs. He said it was important to prioritize my health and safety over preserving money that I might not live long enough to use anyway." The true scope of Damien's plan was becoming clear. He wasn't just trying to control Mom's living situation, he was planning to systematically drain her financial resources under the guise of paying for her care. The expensive assisted living facility would justify ongoing access to her accounts, and the broad language of the power of attorney would give him authority to liquidate her investments and redirect her assets. "Mom, do you remember what we talked about regarding making major financial decisions? You always said you wanted to maintain your independence as long as possible and preserve your savings so you wouldn't be a burden on your children." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "I do remember saying that, Rebecca. But Damien explained that circumstances have changed, and that sometimes we have to adjust our plans based on new realities. He said that trying to maintain independence when you're not capable anymore is actually selfish because it puts stress on family members who have to worry about your safety. Another layer of manipulation, reframing Mom's desire for independence as selfishness and her children's concern as burden. Damien had systematically undermined every value and preference Mom had expressed about her own future, replacing them with his version of what was best for everyone. Mom, I want you to know that whatever Damien has told you about my situation or my feelings, I have never considered you a burden. I have never been too busy or too stressed to help you with anything you needed. And I have never asked him to make arrangements on my behalf without consulting me directly. She looked up at me with confusion and growing distress. But he said you had told him that you were feeling overwhelmed and needed help managing my care. He said you were grateful that he was stepping in to handle the complicated decisions. Mom, I never said any of those things to Damien. In fact, I specifically told him that any major decisions about your care should involve both of us and, most importantly, should be your choice to make. I could see the pieces clicking into place in her mind, the growing realization that she had been deceived. But I also saw something else, relief. Relief that her instincts about the rushed decisions and confusing explanations had been correct. Rebecca, I need to tell you something. I've been keeping a journal since your father passed away, writing down important conversations and decisions so I wouldn't forget details. I've been writing about all my interactions with Damien over the past few months, including the day I signed those papers. She pulled a small notebook from her purse, its pages filled with her careful handwriting. I wrote down everything the lawyer said, all of Damien's explanations, and my questions that never got answered. I also wrote down my feelings about the whole situation, including my doubts about whether I was making the right decisions. This journal could be crucial evidence in challenging the power of attorney. It provided a contemporaneous record of Mom's mental state and decision-making process, written in her own words and demonstrating her capacity to understand and question what was happening to her. Mom, would you be willing to let my attorney friend Jennifer review some of these entries? She specializes in helping families navigate situations like this, and she might be able to provide us with options for addressing your concerns about the arrangements Damien has made. I would like that very much, dear. I've been so worried that I did something wrong, but I couldn't figure out how to fix it. Damien keeps telling me that the papers are already signed and can't be changed, but something about this whole situation still doesn't feel right. As we finished lunch, I felt a surge of hope for the first time since this crisis had begun. Mom was confused and overwhelmed, but she wasn't incapacitated. Her journal entries would demonstrate that she had maintained the ability to observe, question, and document her concerns even under pressure. Most importantly, she was willing to seek help to address a situation that she instinctively knew was wrong. Damien had overplayed his hand by moving too quickly and assuming that Mom would passively accept whatever arrangements he made. What he didn't realize was that his rush to seize control had actually created the evidence we needed to expose his manipulation and restore Mom's autonomy. The next phase of our plan would require careful coordination and flawless execution, but for the first time since this ordeal began, I believed we could not only stop Damien's scheme but also ensure that he faced real consequences for exploiting our mother's trust and love. The meeting between Mom, Jennifer Walsh, and myself took place 3 days later in Jennifer's office. I had spent those intervening days helping Mom organize her journal entries and gather additional documentation that might be relevant to our case. What we discovered was even more damning than I had initially suspected. Mom's journal revealed a systematic campaign of psychological manipulation that had been going on for nearly 6 months. Damien hadn't just responded to his recent financial crisis. He had been laying groundwork for this scheme since long before his cryptocurrency disaster. The entries showed a pattern of visits where he gradually introduced doubt about Mom's living situation, her financial security, and even her relationship with me. "Look at this entry from 4 months ago," Jennifer said, reading from the journal. "Your mother wrote, Damien asked if I ever worry about Rebecca being too busy to help if I had an emergency. He said successful people like her often get so focused on their careers that family becomes secondary. Made me feel sad to think she might see me as a burden." The sophistication of his manipulation was chilling. Damien had been planting seeds of insecurity about my availability and commitment months before he actually needed to activate his scheme. He had been conditioning Mom to doubt our relationship so that when the time came, his version of events would seem plausible. And here, Jennifer continued, pointing to another entry, 3 months ago, Damien mentioned that my apartment at Maplewood might not be the best long-term solution. He said the staff there can't provide real medical care if something serious happens. Asked if I've thought about what would happen if I fell and broke a hip. Never worried about that before, but now I can't stop thinking about it. Fear tactics. Damien had systematically introduced anxieties about hypothetical future problems to make Mom's current living situation seem precarious and dangerous. He had taken a confident, independent woman and gradually eroded her sense of security and self-efficacy. But the most disturbing entries were from the weeks immediately following his cryptocurrency losses. The journal showed that Damien had immediately pivoted from asking for direct financial help to positioning himself as Mom's protector and advocate. This is particularly telling, Jennifer said, reading from a more recent entry. Damien explained that Rebecca is under a lot of stress at work and might not be thinking clearly about family responsibilities. He said sometimes successful people lose perspective about what really matters. He's worried that she might make decisions based on financial considerations rather than love. It was a masterpiece of projection. Damien, who was making every decision based on financial desperation, had convinced Mom that I was the one who couldn't be trusted to prioritize family relationships over money. After reviewing the journal extensively, Jennifer turned to Mom with a gentle but serious expression. Mrs. Patterson, based on what you've shared with us today, I believe you were the victim of a deliberate scheme to manipulate you into signing legal documents that you didn't fully understand. This constitutes elder abuse, and we have several options for addressing it. Mom's face showed a mixture of relief and distress. I knew something felt wrong, but Damien is my son. I kept telling myself that he must have good reasons for everything he was doing. I didn't want to believe that he would deliberately deceive me. That's exactly what makes this type of abuse so effective, Jennifer explained. Perpetrators exploit the victim's love and trust, making them complicit in their own exploitation. The fact that you documented your concerns shows that you maintained clarity about the situation even under pressure. Jennifer outlined our legal options. We could seek an emergency injunction to invalidate the power of attorney documents, file a complaint with Adult Protective Services, and potentially pursue criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. But she also explained the potential consequences of each approach. If we move forward with formal legal action, this will become a matter of public record. Your family's situation will be exposed, and the process could take months to resolve. During that time, the conflict could be very stressful for your mother. What's the alternative? I asked. We give Damien one opportunity to voluntarily surrender the power of attorney and reverse the arrangements he's made. If he refuses or tries to continue his manipulation, then we move forward with the full legal response. Jennifer suggested that I confront Damien directly, armed with the evidence from Mom's journal and the threat of legal action. The goal was to shock him into compliance by demonstrating that we knew exactly what he had done and were prepared to expose his crimes publicly. Based on your description of his personality, I suspect he'll try to bluster and intimidate his way through the confrontation. But once he realizes that you have documented evidence and legal representation, he'll likely fold. Men like your brother are typically cowards when faced with real consequences for their actions. That evening, I called Damien and asked him to meet me at Mom's apartment at Maplewood Gardens. I told him it was urgent and related to finalizing the arrangements for her move. He agreed immediately, probably assuming that I was finally capitulating to his demands. When he arrived at Mom's apartment the next afternoon, he was accompanied by Patricia, which I hadn't expected but which actually worked to our advantage. Patricia's presence would mean that she would witness whatever happened during our confrontation, making it harder for Damien to later claim that I had misrepresented the conversation. Rebecca, I'm glad you've finally come to your senses about this situation, Damien said as he settled into Mom's living room. Patricia and I have been working hard to make sure Mom's transition goes smoothly. We've found her a wonderful room at Golden Years Manor, and the assessment appointment is scheduled for tomorrow. That's what I wanted to discuss with you, I said, remaining standing while they made themselves comfortable on Mom's sofa. I've learned some things about how you obtained the power of attorney that I think we need to address. Damien's expression shifted slightly, but he maintained his confident demeanor. What kinds of things? I hope you're not going to cause problems over paperwork that's already been finalized. I pulled out copies of Mom's journal entries and placed them on the coffee table. I'm talking about the systematic manipulation campaign you've been running for the past 6 months. The lies you told Mom about my availability and my financial situation. The fear tactics you used to undermine her confidence in her living situation. And most importantly, the deception about my consent to these arrangements. Patricia picked up one of the journal pages and began reading, her face growing pale as she processed what Mom had documented. Rebecca, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but, Damien began. I think I've discovered evidence of elder abuse, I interrupted, my voice steady and cold. Deliberate psychological manipulation designed to coerce a vulnerable adult into signing legal documents that serve your financial interests rather than her well-being. The change in Damien's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. His false confidence evaporated, replaced by the cornered animal look I remembered from childhood when he was caught in lies. You can't prove any of that, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. Mom documented everything, Damien. Every conversation, every manipulation, every lie you told her about me and about her situation. She wrote it all down in her own handwriting, with dates and details. Patricia was still reading the journal entries, and I could see the growing horror on her face as she realized the extent of her husband's deception. Whatever story Damien had told her about Mom's supposed decline and my alleged unwillingness to help was crumbling as she read Mom's clear, coherent documentation of his manipulation. Damien, Patricia said quietly, you told me that your mother was confused and that Rebecca had refused to help with her care. This doesn't sound like a confused woman. This sounds like someone who knew exactly what was happening to her. The cracks in Damien's scheme were widening, and he could see his carefully constructed narrative falling apart. What he didn't yet realize was that this confrontation was only the beginning of his problems, and that the choice he made in the next few minutes would determine whether he faced family consequences or criminal prosecution. I pulled out my phone and showed him Jennifer Walsh's business card. I've retained an attorney who specializes in elder abuse cases. She's prepared to file for an emergency injunction to invalidate the power of attorney, and she's also prepared to contact law enforcement about potential criminal charges. The color drained from Damien's face as the full implications of his situation finally hit him. He wasn't just facing family disapproval, he was facing the possibility of real legal consequences that could destroy his reputation and his freedom. The next few minutes would determine whether this family crisis could be resolved quietly or would explode into a public scandal that would expose his crimes to the entire community. The silence in Mom's apartment stretched for what felt like an eternity as Damien processed the reality of his situation. Patricia continued reading through the journal entries, occasionally gasping softly as she discovered new details about her husband's deception. When she finally looked up at Damien, her expression was a mixture of disgust and betrayal that I had never seen before. You told me your mother was losing her memory, Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. You said she was confused and needed someone to make decisions for her because she couldn't understand complex situations anymore. Damien opened his mouth to respond, but Patricia held up her hand to stop him. You made me feel sorry for her, Damien. You made me feel guilty for not wanting to take her into our house. You said Rebecca was being selfish and that we needed to step up as the responsible family members. Her voice was growing stronger, more accusatory. But this woman isn't confused at all, is she? She's been documenting every lie you told her, every manipulation, every time you twisted the truth to serve your own purposes. I watched Damien's face as his wife's words hit him. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was facing consequences that he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out of. Patricia wasn't just angry, she was horrified by what she had unknowingly participated in. Patricia, you don't understand the full situation, Damien began, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Mom is getting older, and she needs protection from you, Patricia snapped, standing up from the sofa and moving away from her husband as if his proximity was physically repulsive. My God, Damien, do you realize what you've done? You've been psychologically abusing your own mother. You've been lying to everyone, including me. I decided it was time to press my advantage. Damien, here's what's going to happen. You're going to contact the lawyer who witnessed the power of attorney signing, and you're going to arrange for those documents to be revoked immediately. You're going to cancel the deposit at Golden Years Manor and any other arrangements you've made without Mom's genuine consent. And you're going to stay away from Mom until she decides whether she wants to maintain a relationship with you. You can't just. Yes, I can. Because if you don't voluntarily reverse everything you've done, I'm going to file formal complaints with Adult Protective Services, the State Attorney General's office, and the local police department. Elder abuse is a felony in this state, Damien, and you've created a paper trail that documents your crimes in excruciating detail. Patricia was staring at her husband with growing realization. The cryptocurrency investments, she said slowly. You lost all our money, didn't you? This whole thing with your mother, it's because you need access to her finances. Damien's silence was answer enough. How much? Patricia demanded. How much did you lose? It's not that simple. How much, Damien? 75,000, he admitted quietly. But it was supposed to be a sure thing. My contact promised. $75,000, Patricia repeated, her voice hollow with shock. You gambled away $75,000 of our money, and then you decided to solve the problem by stealing from your elderly mother. I wasn't stealing. I was trying to find a solution that would help everyone. If Mom moved in with Rebecca, her expenses would be lower, and some of her savings could help with our temporary cash flow problems. It was supposed to be a loan. A loan she never agreed to make, I interjected. A loan you were planning to take without her knowledge or consent. Patricia sank back down onto the sofa, her head in her hands. Damien, my father is going to disown us when he finds out about this. He already thinks you're irresponsible with money, but this is criminal. The mention of Patricia's father seemed to snap Damien back to the immediate threat. Patricia's family was wealthy and well-connected, but they were also extremely conscious of their reputation in the community. If news of Damien's elder abuse scheme became public, it wouldn't just destroy his relationship with his mother, it would destroy his marriage and his access to the social and financial network that had been propping up his lifestyle for years. Rebecca, please, Damien said, his voice taking on the wheedling tone I remembered from childhood when he was trying to avoid punishment. We're family. We can work this out without involving lawyers and government agencies. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow and revoke the power of attorney. I'll cancel everything with Golden Years Manor. Mom can stay at Maplewood Gardens as long as she wants. And what about the debt you've accumulated? What about the cryptocurrency losses? I'll figure something out. Maybe I can get a job, or Patricia's father might be willing to help with a loan. Patricia looked up sharply. Do not involve my father in this mess, Damien. You've already humiliated our family enough. I could see that their marriage was fracturing in real time, another casualty of Damien's desperate schemes. But my focus had to remain on protecting Mom and ensuring that Damien faced appropriate consequences for what he had done. Damien, revoking the power of attorney is just the first step. You also need to understand that your relationship with Mom has been permanently changed by your actions. She trusted you, and you exploited that trust for financial gain. Even if she eventually forgives you, things will never go back to the way they were. I know that. I made mistakes, but I was just trying to solve problems for everyone. I never meant to hurt Mom. You meant to deceive her. You meant to manipulate her into signing documents that would give you control over her life and her money. The fact that you convinced yourself it was for her own good doesn't change the nature of what you did. Patricia stood up again, gathering her purse and coat. I can't be here anymore, she announced. Damien, I'm going to stay with my parents while I decide what I want to do about our marriage. You need to figure out how to fix this situation, and you need to do it without involving me or my family. She turned to me before leaving. Rebecca, I'm sorry. I had no idea what he was really doing. If I had known he was lying about your mother's condition or your willingness to help, I never would have supported any of this. After Patricia left, Damien seemed to deflate completely. Without his wife's presence and implicit support, he looked like what he really was, a middle-aged man who had gambled away his family's security and then tried to solve the problem by victimizing his own mother. What do you want from me, Rebecca? What's it going to take for you to not destroy my life over this? I want you to take responsibility for what you've done. I want you to make genuine amends to Mom, not just legal corrections to paperwork. And I want you to get help for whatever addiction or compulsion led you to think that exploiting an elderly woman was an acceptable solution to your financial problems. And if I do all that, you won't press charges? If you do all that promptly and sincerely, I'll consider keeping this within the family. But Damien, if you ever attempt to manipulate or exploit Mom again, if you ever lie to her or pressure her into any kind of decision that serves your interests rather than hers, I will make sure you face the full legal consequences of elder abuse. He nodded miserably, perhaps finally understanding the gravity of what he had done and the permanent damage he had caused to our family relationships. But as I watched him gather his things and prepare to leave Mom's apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Damien had always been skilled at making promises when cornered, but his track record for keeping those promises was virtually non-existent. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, when we would see whether he was capable of genuine change or whether his apparent remorse was just another manipulation designed to minimize consequences. Either way, I was prepared for whatever came next. Mom's safety and autonomy would be protected, regardless of what choices Damien made about his own future. The next morning, I woke up feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. Damien had agreed to reverse all the arrangements he had made, Patricia had seen the truth about her husband's manipulation, and Mom would be able to remain in her comfortable apartment at Maplewood Gardens. But as I was having my morning coffee and reviewing my schedule for the day, my phone rang with a call that shattered any hope for a simple resolution. It was Mrs. Catherine Bloom from Maplewood Gardens, and her voice carried an urgency that immediately put me on alert. "Miss Sterling, I'm calling about your mother. She's been taken to Willowbrook General Hospital. The paramedics were called early this morning after she was found unconscious in her apartment." My coffee cup slipped from my hand, crashing to the kitchen floor as I processed her words. Unconscious? What happened? Is she okay? One of our staff members found her when she didn't appear for breakfast. She was responsive when the paramedics arrived, but confused and disoriented. They suspect it might have been a medication issue or possibly a minor stroke. She's stable now, but the doctors are running tests. I was already grabbing my keys and purse, my mind racing with possibilities. Could this be coincidental, or was there something more sinister at play? Given everything that had happened with Damien's manipulation campaign, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection. "Mrs. Bloom, had anyone visited my mother yesterday evening or this morning? Any unusual activity in her apartment?" "Well, now that you mention it, your brother did stop by last evening. He said he needed to discuss some family matters with her privately. They talked in her apartment for about an hour." My blood turned to ice. An hour-long private conversation with Damien, followed by a mysterious medical emergency that left Mom confused and disoriented. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. I arrived at Willowbrook General Hospital within 20 minutes, rushing through the emergency department to find Mom's room. When I finally located her, she was awake but clearly struggling with confusion and anxiety. Her usually bright eyes looked clouded, and she seemed to have difficulty focusing on my face. "Mom, it's Rebecca. How are you feeling?" She looked at me with a mixture of recognition and bewilderment. "Rebecca?" "Yes, dear. I'm not sure what happened. I remember Damien coming to visit last night, and we talked about something important. But I can't remember what we discussed or how I ended up here." Dr. Sarah Martinez, the attending physician, arrived and introduced herself before explaining Mom's condition. "We've run a full battery of tests, blood work, CT scan, EKG. Everything appears normal for a woman her age. Her vital signs are stable, and there's no evidence of a stroke or heart attack." "Then what caused her to lose consciousness?" "We found elevated levels of a sleep medication in her bloodstream, zolpidem, commonly known as Ambien. The levels were consistent with someone who had taken 2 or 3 times the recommended dose." I felt my heart sink. My mother doesn't take Ambien. She's never had prescription sleep medication. Dr. Martinez frowned, checking her chart. According to the medication list we received from Maplewood Gardens, she does have a current prescription for zolpidem. It was added to her regimen just yesterday. Added by whom? According to our records, it was prescribed by Dr. Kenneth Hartwell and filled at Riverside Pharmacy. The prescription was brought to her by a family member who helped her take her first dose last night. Dr. Kenneth Hartwell, the same last name as the law firm that had rushed Mom into signing the power of attorney documents. And Riverside Pharmacy was located in the same upscale shopping center where Patricia's family did business. The connections were too obvious to ignore. Doctor, I need to tell you something important. My brother recently obtained power of attorney over my mother's affairs through questionable means, and yesterday we confronted him about his manipulation. This sudden prescription for sleep medication, especially one that resulted in an overdose, is extremely suspicious. Dr. Martinez's expression grew serious. Are you suggesting that your mother was deliberately given an inappropriate dose of medication? I'm suggesting that my brother may have used his power of attorney to obtain prescription medication that my mother didn't need, and then administered it in a way that was intended to cause confusion or incapacity. The implications were chilling. If Damien had deliberately caused Mom's medical emergency, it suggested that he wasn't willing to accept defeat gracefully. Instead, he was escalating his manipulation to include potential physical harm. Dr. Martinez immediately contacted the hospital's social services department and security team. Within an hour, I was speaking with Detective Lisa Chen from the Willowbrook Heights Police Department, who specialized in elder abuse cases. Detective Chen was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened carefully as I explained the entire situation, from Damien's financial crisis to his power of attorney scheme to the suspicious circumstances surrounding Mom's hospitalization. Miss Sterling, what you're describing fits a pattern we see in severe elder abuse cases where the perpetrator feels cornered and desperate. When their initial manipulation doesn't achieve the desired results, they sometimes escalate to more direct forms of harm. You think Damien deliberately overdosed my mother? I think the evidence strongly suggests that possibility. The timing of the prescription, the elevated medication levels, and the context of your confrontation yesterday create a compelling case for intentional harm. Detective Chen explained that they would need to interview Mom when she was more alert, examine the medication bottle and any remaining pills, and investigate the circumstances under which the prescription was obtained. She also recommended that I seek immediate legal protection for Mom. Given what's happened, I would strongly advise getting an emergency restraining order against your brother. We also need to ensure that his power of attorney is immediately suspended pending a full investigation. As if summoned by our conversation, Damien appeared in the hospital corridor, approaching Mom's room with what appeared to be genuine concern on his face. When he saw me talking to Detective Chen, his expression shifted to one of alarm. Rebecca, I came as soon as I heard about Mom. How is she? What did the doctor say? Detective Chen stepped forward, introducing herself and requesting that Damien accompany her to a private room for questioning. Mr. Sterling, we need to discuss your visit with your mother last evening and the circumstances surrounding her medication. I could see panic beginning to creep into Damien's eyes as he realized that his latest scheme had attracted law enforcement attention. Whatever he had hoped to accomplish by causing Mom's medical emergency was about to backfire spectacularly. I don't understand why police are involved. This was just a medical incident. Mom has been confused lately, and she might have accidentally taken too much of her sleep medication. According to her daughter, your mother doesn't have a history of sleep problems or sleep medication. Can you explain how she came to have a prescription for zolpidem that was filled just yesterday? Damien's face went pale as he realized that his manipulation had left a clear paper trail. Unlike his previous schemes that relied on psychological pressure and verbal deception, obtaining and administering prescription medication created physical evidence that couldn't be explained away. She mentioned having trouble sleeping, so I arranged for her to see a doctor who could help. I was just trying to take care of her medical needs. The doctor who prescribed the medication is Dr. Kenneth Hartwell. What is your relationship with Dr. Hartwell? He's just a physician who specializes in geriatric care. I found him through research. But Detective Chen had already done her homework. Dr. Hartwell is the brother of the attorney who witnessed your mother's power of attorney documents. He's also currently under investigation by the state medical board for inappropriate prescribing practices in elder care cases. The web of corruption was unraveling rapidly. Damien hadn't just manipulated Mom. He had connected with a network of professionals who were willing to provide fraudulent legal and medical services to support elder abuse schemes. As Detective Chen led Damien away for formal questioning, I realized that what had started as a family conflict over a loan request had escalated into a criminal case involving fraud, elder abuse, and potentially attempted murder. Damien's desperation had driven him to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and the consequences would extend far beyond our family. Mom was safe for now, but the full scope of Damien's crimes was still being uncovered. And as I sat beside her hospital bed, watching her slowly regain clarity and strength, I knew that our family would never be the same again. 2 months later, I sat in the packed courtroom of the Willowbrook County Courthouse, watching as my brother was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. The transformation from the confident, manipulative man who had strutted into my office demanding compliance to this defeated figure was so complete that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The investigation that followed Mom's hospitalization had uncovered a conspiracy that went far beyond Damien's individual crimes. Dr. Kenneth Hartwell and his brother, attorney Robert Hartwell, had been running a sophisticated elder abuse operation, targeting vulnerable seniors whose families were experiencing financial stress. They would facilitate fraudulent power of attorney documents, unnecessary medical diagnoses, and inappropriate medications, all designed to transfer control and assets from elderly victims to desperate family members who were willing to pay for their services. Damien had been their latest client, but he was hardly their first. Detective Chen's investigation revealed at least 12 other families who had been victimized by the Hartwell brothers' scheme over the past 3 years. The total financial damage exceeded $2 million, and several elderly victims had suffered serious medical complications from inappropriate medications. Patricia sat 3 rows behind me, her parents flanked on either side of her. She had filed for divorce within a week of Damien's arrest, and her father had hired one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the state, not to defend Damien, but to ensure that Patricia and her family were completely insulated from any legal consequences of his actions. The Blackwell family's reputation in Riverside Estates was their most valuable asset, and they were taking no chances that Damien's crimes would tarnish their standing in the community. Mom was seated beside me, looking frail but determined. The medication overdose had taken a toll on her physically, but her mental clarity had returned completely once the drugs cleared her system. More importantly, her confidence and sense of autonomy had been gradually restored through months of counseling and support from elder protective services. "I want to see this through," she had told me when I suggested she might prefer to avoid the stress of a public trial. "Other families need to know what these men are capable of. If my testimony can prevent even one other person from going through what I experienced, then it's worth it." The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michael Torres, had built an airtight case. In addition to Mom's detailed journal entries and testimony from multiple victims, they had financial records showing payments from Damien to the Hartwell brothers, recorded conversations from the hospital where Damien had made incriminating statements, and expert testimony about the dangers of the medication scheme. When it was time for victim impact statements, Mom insisted on speaking herself, despite my offers to read a statement on her behalf. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness, "I want to tell you about what it feels like to have your own child betray your trust in the most fundamental way possible." She spoke for 10 minutes about the psychological damage of discovering that someone she loved had systematically manipulated and deceived her. She talked about the fear and confusion of waking up in a hospital, not knowing how she had gotten there or what had happened to her. Most powerfully, she described the ongoing process of learning to trust her own judgment again after months of being told that she was confused, incapable, and burdensome. "I don't want vengeance against my son," she concluded, looking directly at Damien for the first time since entering the courtroom. "But I want justice for all the families who have been hurt by these crimes. And I want other elderly people to know that they have the right to make their own decisions about their lives, even when their children think they know better." When it was Damien's turn to speak, his court-appointed attorney had clearly advised him to express remorse and accept responsibility. But even in his apology, I could hear echoes of the manipulation and self-justification that had characterized his behavior throughout this ordeal. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong, but I want the court to understand that I never intended to hurt my mother. I was facing financial pressures that I didn't know how to handle, and I made terrible decisions when I should have asked for help in appropriate ways. I love my mother, and I will regret my actions for the rest of my life." It was a carefully crafted statement that acknowledged wrongdoing while minimizing intent and emphasizing his supposed love for Mom. Even facing serious prison time, Damien couldn't bring himself to fully accept the cruelty and calculation of what he had done. Judge Margaret Foster had presided over many elder abuse cases during her 20 years on the bench, and her response was swift and unforgiving. "Mr. Sterling, you have been convicted of elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted assault of a vulnerable adult. These are not crimes of passion or momentary poor judgment. The evidence shows that you engaged in a sustained campaign of psychological manipulation against your own mother, exploiting her love and trust for your financial benefit." She paused, looking directly at Damien with obvious disgust. "When your initial scheme was exposed and challenged, rather than accepting responsibility and making amends, you escalated to potentially lethal physical harm. Your actions endangered your mother's life and caused immeasurable psychological trauma that she will carry for the rest of her days." The sentence was harsh but fair: 8 years in state prison for Damien, with mandatory restitution to all victims of the Hartwell brothers' scheme. Dr. Kenneth Hartwell received 12 years for his role as the ringleader, while attorney Robert Hartwell was sentenced to 10 years and permanent disbarment. As the bailiff led Damien away, he turned to look at Mom and me one final time. I saw no remorse in his eyes, only anger and resentment at being held accountable for his choices. In that moment, I knew that the brother I had grown up with, selfish and irresponsible but not fundamentally evil, was truly gone, replaced by someone capable of victimizing the most vulnerable members of his own family. Outside the courthouse, Mom and I stood together in the afternoon sunshine, both emotionally exhausted but relieved that this chapter was finally closing. "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Mom asked quietly. "I don't know, Mom. That will be up to him. If he serves his sentence and demonstrates genuine change, maybe there's a possibility for some kind of relationship in the future. But it will never be the same as it was before." She nodded, understanding that some betrayals create permanent changes that can't be undone through apologies or time. "I want to go home now," she said, referring to her apartment at Maplewood Gardens where she had chosen to remain despite offers from me to move in together. "I want to get back to my normal life and put all of this behind us." As I drove her back to Maplewood Gardens, I reflected on how completely Damien's scheme had backfired. His attempt to gain control over Mom's life and finances had resulted in his complete removal from both our lives. His marriage was destroyed, his reputation was ruined, and his freedom was forfeit. Most ironically, the financial problems that had motivated his crimes were now exponentially worse, with massive legal bills and restitution payments that would follow him for decades. But perhaps the greatest cost was the family he had destroyed through his choices. Mom and I had grown closer through this ordeal, but the casual trust and unconditional love that had once defined our family relationships were permanently altered. Every family gathering, every phone call, every interaction would now carry the shadow of what Damien had been willing to do to the people who loved him most. Some prices are too high to pay, and some mistakes are too fundamental to forgive. Damien had learned that lesson too late, and he would spend the next 8 years thinking about the family he had sacrificed for money he had never actually obtained. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.